Hello book people, PT Hylton here. Instead of the usual Friday Reads video today, I decided that I would talk a little bit about the author of the book that I'm reading currently, which is Mr. Mercedes. That's the book, not the author, just to be clear. I want to talk a little bit about Stephen King. I read my first Stephen King book when I was 13. It was Misery, and I've read at least one Stephen King book every year since then. Most years it's been more than one. And I'm in my mid-30s now, so that's been a lot of books. I've read more books by Stephen King than I have by any other author. And I was thinking about why I keep coming back to him, what I like about Stephen King. And, you know, much like Liam Neeson in those Taken movies, Stephen King is an author with a particular set of skills, and there's one of those skills I think that I'm really drawn to, something that I think he does better than any other author. And that's what I want to talk about today. When most people think of Stephen King, they might think of his kind of folksy characters, they might think of his crazy stories, they might think of kind of the mixed bag of movies that have been adapted from his books, but mostly they probably think of horror. More specifically, they think of fear. But in my opinion, fear, at least fear alone, isn't necessarily what Stephen King does best. See, in my mind, fear is the suspicion that something terrible is going to happen, or even the belief that something terrible is going to happen. And what makes Stephen King great, and what makes me keep coming back to his books again and again, I believe, is that he does show that, but he also shows the belief that something good is going to happen. In other words, hope. Stephen King takes fear in one hand and hope in the other hand, and he mixes them together and plays them off one another in always interesting and unexpected ways. And I think that's what he does best, and that's what keeps bringing me back to his books. And I'll give you a few examples from a few of his more famous works of some of the ways that he does that. So let's look at his first published novel, Carrie. And I guess if you have somehow avoided both the movie and the book Carrie for your whole life, this has some spoilers for Carrie. Just to jog your memory, Carrie is definitely a big outcast, and she is asked to the prom by a popular, good-looking boy named Tommy, I think it's Tommy. And at first she thinks it's got to be a joke, it's got to be a trick, which of course it is. But eventually she kind of starts to hope. She lets the hope in, and she makes her own dress for the prom. When she goes to prom, this is something that I didn't realize until I read the book last year, or I might have missed in my first reading, and it kind of came more to the front when I read the book last year, which is when she's at the prom and she's hanging out with the cool kids, she starts to be herself, and the cool kids actually kind of start to like her and realize that she's funny and stuff like that. And just at that moment, when everything is going great and the best, they announce the king and queen of the prom, and you know what happens from there. Another example is Misery, the first Stephen King book I read. Again, if you know absolutely nothing about Misery, this is a little bit of spoilers, I guess. So author Paul Sheldon is held prisoner by the absolutely terrifying psychotic nurse Annie Wilkes. And she's absolutely terrifying, but over time Paul starts to see how he might escape, and he starts to get hope. And he has some little successes in his steps towards his plan. And he starts to let more and more hope come in, more and more hope come in. And just when he's let like all the hope come in, that's when Annie Wilkes comes in and has a really nice conversation with him about the origin of the word hobbling. The final example I want to give, in the one that has me thinking about it this week, is right from the prologue of Mr. Mercedes. I'm not done with this book yet, but I think the prologue does a great job of demonstrating this. And if you know absolutely nothing about this book, actually I don't think this is a spoiler because this is like on the book jacket description and all that stuff. But basically what it is it takes place in a town during a kind of recession. There's a lot of unemployed people, and the mayor has promised 1,000 new jobs, and all these people show up to this job fair for their chance at those 1,000 jobs. They're actually camping out the night before on this cold night outside of where the job fair is going to be held, in the hopes of being the first ones to speak with the potential employers. This section has a lot of classic Stephen King tropes. Working class people doing the best they can. Strangers like having a really deep connection oddly quickly. That happens a lot in Stephen King books. But most of all, there's our point of view character in this prologue. He's a guy who's kind of conflicted about being at this job fair, obviously very downtrodden and unhappy with his lot in life, but yet he has a pretty positive outlook. And like I said earlier, he's a working class guy trying to do his best, and we just kind of like him right away. Stephen King's really good at getting us to like him. To bring it back to this conversation, what's really important about that main character is that he has hope. He's not entirely happy that he's at this job fair situation, but he hopes he has a lot of different hopes in that prologue, a lot of thoughts about, man, if I can just get this job, maybe it'll get the ball rolling in the right direction, get my life turned around a little bit. And of course, just when he's hoping, we've got this crowd full of hopeful people. A Mercedes comes barreling in and drives right into the middle of the crowd with the goal of taking out as many of the hopeful job seekers as possible. In all these examples, Stephen King is showing us the price of hope. We have people who get their hopes way high up, and it's almost like when they hope, they're opening the door to the possibility of being hurt, and they are hurt. But he also shows it the other way too, and it's hard to give examples of this without spoiling the endings of books, so I'm not going to give any concrete examples. He demonstrates that hope is dangerous, but he also demonstrates again and again that it's crucial. And in his books, it always seems like the characters that he has the least sympathy for are the characters who've completely given up hope. I'm thinking of characters like the one that leaps to mind first, of course, is like Carrie's mother. Just lives in such fear and with no hope. Characters like that are the ones that Stephen King paints with the least amount of sympathy, and his heroes are always the ones who hang on to hope despite all reason. And it's usually that very hope, that very thing that he shows again and again is dangerous, that ends up being the thing that saves them. So he uses both fear and hope. He shows us that there's danger in both of them. And finally, he shows us that hope is costly, but it's worth the price. And I think that's what Stephen King does better than everyone else. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.